Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unit Lost. I am Josh, and today we're going to talk all about Reinhardt. And there's a whole array of different things we're going to talk about. I'm actually going to just start us off straight away with a fight that we're looking at right now. And we're going to just look at a couple of the things he's doing. So we're looking at positioning, where we're moving, reading fights, learning and understanding what you need to be doing at any given time. Also, the interim period, those moments where you're not actually in a fight, but you're between fights. Like you can see on screen now, you've got to get into position. How are the pros doing that with Reinhardt? How do you maintain your shield? What do you do? Do you fire strike? Do you not fire strike? We'll talk about fire strikes. We'll talk about all sorts of different things. We'll talk about engagements, how to engage with Reinhardt with the support of your team. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about Earth Shatters, planning them out, what you're looking to get from them, and what you're looking to achieve with those ultimates. Is it okay to spam it? Is it not? There are so many questions, and so let's begin. So this video is a little different than the last one. We're going to actually look at more details, we're going to look at more principles, and at the start of this video, it makes sense to look at how Gesture starts a fight. You'll notice straight away that he's using line of sight, and he's thinking about the threats that are arrayed against his team. His job as Reinhardt is to block as much damage as he can, so he's always trying to figure out where are those great big sources of damage, but he's also very cleverly using that little pillar in the middle of the map as a place where he can hide, regenerate a little bit of shield here and there, and try and get that little bit of extra health where possible, so that he can then go in, get a couple of cheeky swings in there, maybe get one or two quick hits, and then get a little bit more work done as that tank. He wants to rebuild that shield for as long as possible in a single unbroken stint. You know, he doesn't want to sort of bring it up and down because then it stops regenerating, and he wants to try and get it up as much as possible, and then he can start being more proactive as it starts dropping down lower and lower. Notice he never lets it break, and notice he takes opportunities to rest it where he can. We're going to take a look at another fight beginning, but this time let's look at the principle. So again, using that line of sight, but peeking around the corner, trying to avoid taking too much barrier damage, but notice that he goes in and takes a couple of swings. He's also throwing out fire strikes as well, which is what we're going to talk about next, but he's being very greedy with his swings in these early fights, and the reason for that is quite simple. In these early battles, it is a huge priority for the Reinhardt to try and build up as much ultimate charge as possible. A fast Earth Shatter can definitely change the pace of the game, and if you get a couple of good swings onto most of the enemy team, well, you're going to be in a pretty good position and hopefully can convert that into a big fat team fight win. The next thing I want to touch on very briefly is fire strikes. Notice he's not really throwing them out anymore. He's doing it every so often when he's sort of out of line of sight and can just hide away, and his team's hiding away nice and safe, but he doesn't just throw them out on cooldown. It's a good way for your team members to die. The other thing I want to point out is he's not just swinging in willy-nilly, by the way. He's not just going a bit crazy and dropping his barrier and swinging. He's letting his Zarya know, or his Zarya is letting him know rather, that barrier is up, so she's going to give him a barrier that he can then get, and then he can take a couple of those cheeky swings. If you go and pull up some footage from earlier, just from some of the clips we've seen, every single time he goes for those swings, the Zarya tells him, hey, I've got a barrier for you, go for it, Gesture, go a bit mad, try and get some damage done, try and get that ult up nice and quickly, and if it works, then great, Zarya gets some charge, Gesture gets some charge, it's all good in the hood, everyone is super happy about it. If you try and do that without that, well, you're probably going to die pretty quickly. So work with your Zarya, basically. If your Zarya is giving you lots of bubbles, try and make sure you're playing aggressively when she's giving you them, and then when the bubble's down on cooldown, well, play a little bit more passively perhaps. Okay, now something a little bit strange to focus on, but 90% of your time as Reinhardt is honestly doing stuff like this. I call this the interim period, or the non-fighting period, where you're just holding your barrier up most of the time. And honestly, it's very much worth focusing on how pros act and behave in that period of time. The biggest thing I want to draw your attention to is, I mentioned it earlier, but it's actually the lack of fire strikes. You'll notice this, that a lot of lower tier Reinhardts, there's an urge, and I'm guilty of this myself, there's an urge to like throw fire strikes out very willy-nilly, like they're on off cooldown, you throw it out, and then next thing you know that happens is Zenyatta fires a great big shot into your team, and your Zenyatta just explodes, right? You've got to be very careful when using the fire strike ability. So, if you notice in the background, he's only throwing them out when he knows that it's safe. You can see the enemy team down there on the low ground, he doesn't just fire one off, because a Zen could come around a corner and snipe somebody. No, he's waiting until he's either engaged when he's got his barrier down for a little while, or if the enemy team's retreating or moving away. He's not just throwing them out, he's doing it whenever it's safe and whenever there's no chance for his team to actually just get sniped off completely. The way I want you to think of Fire Strike is this. It is a tool for generating some ultimate charge, and it's a tool for maybe getting some extra damage during fights. It isn't really a good poking tool because it does just charge up enemy supports, but it also leaves your team a little bit vulnerable. When coaching Reinhardt myself, I often advise them to do less and win more. It sounds like a really silly thing to say, but honestly, the more that you're keeping your barrier up and stable and making sure that your team is safe, the better things will generally go as Reinhardt. You try and get super fancy and snipe people off too much with fire strikes, then things can go slightly wrong. But what about in combat, I hear you ask? What do I do in combat? Well, the idea is that you try and block as much damage as you reasonably can, but you also act as a deterrent for the enemy by taking swings with your hammer. Basically, they can't run into you because they'll take too much damage with the hammer, but they also can't stay away from you and not pressure you because your barrier is just going to stay up, and then they can't do any actual damage to your team. Now then, you also want to be very careful about letting your barrier drop and run out of energy effectively. You don't want it to break, you don't want it to go down during a fight because that gives so much advantage to the enemy Reinhardt. Once that barrier is gone, he's free for Earth Shatters, the enemy team's free to just put damage into your team, and it's very visible, it's very you can hear it, it's very audible, you know that it's happened, and so the enemy team will go very aggressive once it's broken. You can see in a lot of these clips that I'm showing you, Gesture is keeping his barrier up and then backing away somewhere where he can get out of line of sight and let his barrier recharge for a considerable amount of time. Also in fights he's doing a mixture of keeping his barrier up, dropping his barrier, taking some swings when the enemy piles in and gets a bit closer, and then he's backing away when he's feeling threatened, using that barrier with charge on it to keep himself alive, and then he's going to keep the fight going and keep that momentum going. He's looking to do a little bit of damage here and there to discourage the enemy getting in and to block as much as he can. He wants to be the wall, and that's Reinhardt's main role in a team, of course. So we've talked about barriers, we talked about swinging the hammers, we talked about fire strikes. Let's talk about another of Reinhardt's abilities that often dooms him to an uncertain fate. That is the charge. You will notice he does not charge much at all. In fact, most of the charges are done into graviton surges to try and pull the enemy Reinhardt out so a diva bomb can explode, or is to just get a kill in a graviton surge or stunned target to try and blow them up with that extra squishy, well, blow up a squishy basically with that extra damage that the charge gives you, so you can just one-shot them and get rid of them out of the fight as quickly as possible. He isn't doing like mad dashes, he isn't doing crazy charges, he's using it to either counteract the enemy charge, or he's using it to peel people out of barriers mostly. Again, that less is more principle coming out of Gesture, coming out of a lot of pros. Now there are exceptions, one or two. Reinhardts do exist that will go for very aggressive charges. Reinforced was mostly known for it, Fraggy as well, Philadelphia Fusion player who unfortunately doesn't get to see too much light of day these days, probably for that very reason. But you'll see from Gesture especially, very conservative play. It's a very easy way just to commit suicide and to basically lose a fight for your team, so you'll see pros not very often use the charge for more than that graviton surge, peeling that, pulling people out of the surge, pulling a barrier away from the surge so that people can get more damage in. If you are working with this area, always try and charge the Reinhardt out of the graviton surge, and conversely, by the way, if you are playing Reinhardt and Azaria throws down a graviton surge, jump into it. Jump into it to block all the damage, to be the shield and to block what damage you can. Just be ready to try and countercharge an enemy Reinhardt who's trying to peel you out of it because, well, these principles work both ways. Worth mentioning after that little segment, the Gesture charges so little that I really struggled looking for footage, getting him doing that grab charge thing. London Spitfire, not the best at executing that strategy. One of the clips in there was even Fissure doing it just to demonstrate the concept, but it does work, trust me, teams do practice that. The next thing I want to talk about is Reinhardt's hidden ability, I suppose, in the current meta, which is the one that everyone's probably been waiting to hear about, what people call the fatty shatty. That's right, it's Earth Shatter time. Reinhardt's ultimate is ground-poundingly good. It is amazingly powerful at ending teamfights, and especially in the 3-3 meta, it's one of the few decisive fight-winning abilities. Unfortunately, well, you can whiff it quite a lot. It's actually pretty easy to whiff, and you'll see a lot of Reinhardts do so, and part of the reason why is there are a couple of schools of thought on Earth Shatter. The first is, just use it whenever you can, play it aggressively, go fast and loose with it. You'll often see Reinhardts do what Gesture and Fissure were doing quite a lot in this series, trying to like jockey past each other, push past each other, and then try and Earth Shatter the team behind them. The danger, of course, of doing this is that if the enemy Brigitte is paying attention, well, she'll stun you, and then you won't be able to ult, and then you'll feel really silly because you've just lost your ult to a Brig stun, and that shouldn't really happen. The second alternative is you try and bully down the enemy Reinhardt, or find a clear path past the Reinhardt where he's, either distracted, gone off to a different direction, or he's just dead, or his shield has been broken. That way you can get the shatter in. The third way is the more decisive way. You throw it into the back of a Graviton Surge. So you basically combine the D.Va combo, the D.Va, Zarya, Graviton Bomb combo, with an Earth Shatter as well. So the Reinhardt's trying to block the great big D.Va Bomb that's landing on top of him pretty much. You throw an Earth Shatter into the back of that, everyone gets knocked down, you can't block it anymore with a shield, and as a result, everybody should die. If it works, you win the teamfight. If it doesn't, you've just blown 3 ultimates, and it's going to be a bit tough. The drawback of that third school of thought as well is that the secret to Reinhardt's gaining their Earth Shatter so very quickly in these pro level games is using that Graviton Surge. The best time to Earth Shatter in a high level match is right before the Graviton Surge comes out, because what happens then is everyone gets pulled into the grav, you swing your hammer once or twice, and you've got another Earth Shatter pretty much immediately. Swinging into those great big clumps of people is the greatest way to charge up that ultimate. You'll often see pro level Reinhardts kind of just go for Earth Shatters at times as well, play surprisingly, maybe just throw it out and see if it works, see if the enemy team drop the barrier for whatever reason. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes they look a bit silly, but honestly I don't mind seeing it. Keep the enemy on the toes somewhat, make sure they respect you and respect the fact that you pose a constant threat to them. With Gesture in particular, I'd say he really favours counter-aggression shatters. He waits for the enemy team to play very aggressive, where they're going for a Graviton Surge or going for a big push, and then he tries to hit them with an Earth Shatter as they perhaps over-engage. More cautious teams, however, seem to catch him out with this quite a lot. He likes throwing out shatters almost, just to see what happens. If the enemy blocks it, well, then he's not going to get much value. That can leave him a touch vulnerable. The big thing with shatter is to pay attention to how the enemy Reinhardt behaves. If you let you slip past them every so often, you might be able to find somebody, but if he's playing very conservatively, you might want to just be a bit more careful. The big thing though is that he has to respect you if you are playing in that form. He can't be dropping his barrier and playing super aggressive. He has to keep it up and respect the fact that you could drop a fatty shaddy on him at any point in time. To round out this video, we're going to take a look at a team fight as a whole and just use all these concepts, sort of comment on what's happening and employ the ideas that we talked about. We're also going to talk about pace of the game. So you can see the footage that was rolling in the background right now. Spitfire are very much in control. Gesture's going to be playing fast and loose as a result to try and build up as much of that Earth Shatter as he can for the next fight, but also just to clean up as quickly as possible. They finished capping out the point, and now, well, they've got to wait for the payload to roll around, but they're going to try and take some ground. Gesture's just going to wait and get this payload starting to roll and try and get it through these doors as quickly as possible. Seoul Dynasty, meanwhile, are going to try and contest them at this gateway. The gateway, of course, is the sort of where the first contest generally happens. So you can see Spitfire starting to set up in positions and get ready to take the fight there. Gesture's going to play fast and loose with fire strikes because most of his team are hiding behind the payload or out of line of sight, so he can afford to throw out a fire strike or two, try and rush out that ultimate. You can see he's got to go for it now actually. He runs forward, gets some swings in and builds up the shadow, but it costs him his life. We're going to skip ahead until the next push and then go for the concepts of aggression and tactical retreat. So his Earth Shatter's up and good to go, so fire striking now isn't going to actually give him too many advantages. You can see Fissure actually throwing one or two out there again. Same concept as with Gesture, is if most of his team is hiding behind corners and stuff, he doesn't need to keep his barrier up and he can afford to throw out a fire strike or two. Gesture, meanwhile, not throwing out any, you notice. There's no need for him to. It's not going to kill anyone, it's just going to give enemy supports charge. Seoul get aggressive and Gesture realizes this. He pulls back with his team. Zarya gives him a bubble as well just to keep him nice and safe, and now he's going to go around the corner, stay out of line of sight and regenerate that shield. Once it's good to go once again, then the initiative is back on Spitfire's side. They have 2,000 barrier and they can start rolling forward. Again, Gesture's going to use that line of sight trick, get forward, take ground, build up some charge, and now he's going to play more aggressive. Fissure actually gets past him, that sort of Earth Shatter duel between Reinhardts we talked about earlier where they're trying to get past each other. They do end up trading, and as a result, well, Gesture gets the second trade, catches people off guard, and actually lands a couple of kills. Of course, the Transcendence did help a little bit as well from the Zenyatta, worth mentioning, of course. That about concludes it for a look at Gesture's Reinhardt, guys. Hopefully you guys found a couple of tips in there just to help you out with your Reinhardt play, and hopefully you preferred this format to the previous one. I know the moment we released that previous one, or the moment I showed Sty that video, we were like, yeah, we can improve this format, and I went ahead and we're experimenting around, seeing how it goes. Hopefully this one's better. Again, we do need your help though. I want to know who you guys want to see, what heroes you want to see. The meta's a little bit stale at the moment, so if you're expecting to see Genji play, you might want to wait until next stage, but hopefully soon. Do make sure that if you did enjoy the video, of course, that a like and all that usual YouTube stuff. Sub if you haven't already. Ding the bell if you haven't already and want to be notified. And you can find me on Twitter as well at @1_amongst many. You can find Stylosa at @Stylosa as well. Go and give him a follow. He needs more followers, clearly. Alright guys, thank you for watching to the end. It's been my pleasure to bring this video to you, and I'll see you next time. Toodles.